This is a really difficult question.
Oh, that's a great question.
Oh, that's a good question.
That is a great question.
That's a really good question.
I love this question, and I think this really is going to help me kind of meditate and grow on it.
Want to hear the answers? Check out Season 2 of New Media Lab with Robert Southgate. New episodes every Tuesday. Available on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, and wherever you subscribe to your favorite podcasts. Welcome back to another episode of New Media Lab. I've got a fantastic episode for you today. Before we get into who my guest is, let me introduce myself. I'm your host, Robert Southgate, and I am so honored that you have decided to join me. As promised last time, I have a great interview for you today. Some of you may know this person, and for those of you that don't, it is my pleasure to be the one to introduce you to him. My guest is Gordon Rochford from the Those Conspiracy Guys podcast. It is a fantastic show that is totally crushing it. After my conversation with Gordon, I can see why. This is the interview that I mentioned in the last episode as having over 2 hours of additional content, which I will be placing on our Patreon page for our subscribers. When I pitched the idea of an interview to each of our guests, I told them I had 10 questions and that the total time commitment would be a maximum of maybe 25 minutes. Gordon kept me on the phone for almost 3 hours, and it was mind-blowing. He shared tips and secrets that no one else did. He was so forthcoming and honest about his podcast journey, I couldn't imagine cutting him off. One other thing I'll tell you about Gordon and his podcast, Those Conspiracy Guys, is it completely ignores the rules and is unapologetic about it. Before we get to the interview, I do have a little business to take care of first. We have a Patreon page, which I just mentioned, where you can directly support this show and help keep us going. Every month I share Patreon-only content, like the additional 2 hours of Gordon's interview, just for you, the patrons. Please go to patreon.com/New Media Lab and choose your tier. It's a great way to support the show and help keep the lights on here at Southgate Media Group. A show like this is best when the audience and host are engaged with each other. In other words, get in conversation with me, either through email, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, or any place else you can find me. The email for this show is southgatesmallbusiness@gmail.com. Send me your questions. Send me your comments. I promise I will respond. You can find New Media Lab on Facebook by searching @New Media Lab Show, or you can follow me on Twitter @RSouthgate, or on Instagram @RobSouthgate. Our network's website is southgatemediagroup.com, where you can find this, as well as over the 100 other podcasts that I'm executive producer on, plus blogs, videos, and so much more. Finally, follow our newest endeavor on Twitter @IndiePodcastProject, and be sure to use the hashtag #SupportIndiePodcasts when posting your own shows or sharing anything that's podcast related. Okay, enough with the business. Let's get on with this interview. So, Gordon, can you describe your podcast?
Yeah, my podcast is Those Conspiracy Guys, and it's a conversational conspiracy show where we take some of the classic conspiracies like 9/11, Sasquatch, these kind of usual fare, and we also do political and cultural analysis and discuss it in a friendly, funny manner. And the humor in some of the darker topics is like the sugar that helps the medicine go down. It's a roundtable discussion, usually with 3 guests, and they're comedians from my old life as a stand-up comic in Dublin City in Ireland. And they join me. We have a kind of a roundtable discussion, easily casual conversational, and some of the episodes go up to 6 or 7 hours, which seems maybe unmanageable for a podcast, but yeah, people seem to love it, and we get a lot of feedback. People like the conversation; they like the kind of the casual nature of it, and we like to dive deep into all the topics. So we go into what's usually on the internet is our main fare. And if there's some books or some specific knowledge that we need to get, we go looking there. So the remit of the show is to take whatever is online and examine that and run our bullshit meter over it to see if it's true or not true. And at the end of the show, we get off the fence and give our own personal opinion about the information that we were able to find. So it's approachable, it's functional. We ruin our browser history, so you don't have to looking up stuff like Jimmy Savile. But the conversation part of it and the discussion, like the deep discussion and kind of taking apart these theories, is what people really enjoy.
When did you start podcasting?
I started the idea of Those Conspiracy Guys in mid 2013. That summer we were talking about doing a show. I had already given up stand-up comedy, and I was itching to perform in some way, shape or form. And Eamon O'Neill and Paul Kelly, who were the two original conspiracy guys, we all came together and started making this show. I started on my own in summer 2013, and I started producing the show, learning how to make websites, learning how to do podcasting, learning about the industry, listening to Dave Jackson's podcast on how to podcast, and Pat Flynn as well, and trying to figure out like what mics you would need and what equipment could we get away with, because I didn't have much money at the time. I was working a part-time job in a phone store and then another part-time job as a traditional Irish music guide around Dublin City. So it was it was a weird time. I planned it for a whole year, and then we launched in 2014 on September 11th with a show on 9/11, and the whole first season was over before the end of 2014. So it's just over 4 years doing it now, and it didn't take off straight away, but it has grown to a behemoth now.
Are you a celebrity, or are there any celebrities associated with your show?
I don't think I'm a celebrity, but I have been stopped on the street like a bunch of times and be like, "Oh my God, are you the guy from the thing?" And I'm like, "Yes, I am." But I always take a step back, because with conspiracy fans, it could end up being like a love knife, which is like, "I love you so much, stab, stab, stab." Like,
I don't think I've ever heard love knife before.
Yeah, if I can't, it's a Tenacious D term. If I can't have you, nobody will. Stab, stab, stab. I think now, with the amount of people that listen for the amount of time that they do, I think I would class it as some sort of celebrity. Yeah, but I don't think of myself like that. I'm still a dude who sits around in my underwear, like making podcasts.
When you started your podcast, I know that you're talking about the podcast part of it, but when you started, do you think you were a level of celebrity already?
I don't think so at all.
Because you said you did stand-up comedy.
Yeah, but I mean, like 60 people knew who I was. Like, there's more people would be in a queue at Starbucks than would have known me for being a stand-up comedian. Like, they're mostly friends and stuff, In like zero capacity was I a celebrity when I started it. Within our first couple of months, we were getting 20,000 to 30,000 downloads a month, which is huge for a new show. And I wanted to move with that, and I was getting those emails at the start. I was like, "Oh, this is cool," and it seemed like vindication. When I was doing stand up here in Ireland, you're doing it to 30 or 40 people. They didn't initially buy a ticket to see just you. It was more like a showcase type thing. So they show up and they knew there was just general comedy happening. So you're just like a pleasant or sometimes unpleasant surprise. So you have to go out there, you have to win them over. It's not like, in America, you go to a comedy show and you'd have, go to a comedy show in LA, you might have like Aziz Ansari is playing.
Yeah.
And you know him, and he's like, "Oh my God, we got to get tickets to go see Aziz Ansari," and you're in a place with 80 people. Like in Ireland, it doesn't work like that. It's just some lad telling jokes about his dick, and it might end up making a fan or someone to follow you on Twitter. But there's no real infrastructure for the creation of celebrity in stand-up comedy in Ireland. Music may be a little bit different, but I don't think I was in any way successful outside of the medium of podcasting for the production of media.
Do you think gaining audience today is the same as when you started?
I do and I don't. Like, gaining an audience is gaining an audience. So the things that are universal across any, media for gaining an audience. If you have regularity of both production and of quality, if you have consistency of both like release schedule and of content quality, the willingness to adapt and change. If your content is going to stay the same forever, it's going to grow too big for the pot that it's in. So you're going to have to change, like, or evolve slowly somehow. And the lads that don't do that don't stay successful. You see that most in music, where the first album is like raw and it's all I'm in the garage, man. The second album then tends to be a little bit more heavily produced, and the third album tends to veer off into some other kind of genre and maybe change it up a little bit, like Dylan going electric, this kind of stuff, So if you're not willing to do that, you won't be getting new audience, because the people who could be new come to join your show are like, that's the same old shit I was listening to 3 years ago. I was giving this guy a chance. Also, the people are getting older, so the longer you have a show, like there's people that have podcasts for 10 years, so their fans might have started listening to them at 20. If it was like, a beers and boobs, as I call them, a beers and boobs podcast, where it's just like three fat white guys and they talk about comic books, computer games, TV shows, and then they reviewed whatever beer they're drinking, and then they're like, oh, we're so funny, man. Like, those shows peter off very quick, because the people that start listening to them at 20, by the time they're 30, they're like, this is bullshit.
I've listened to enough of that. Yeah.
I'm finished with that. So if you're not willing to evolve and change and develop and grow, the audience now, for me, I find that it's coming in thicker and faster, and you reach a tipping point. So if you've read the wonderful book, The Tipping Point,
Malcolm Gladwell,
it'll tell you that at some point you don't have to enact that same labor. You don't have to do that stuff the same way. You don't have to hustle as hard. So at the very, very start, we were putting out, social media posts. I have what I call integrated media. So I had like a grand plan that ended up being way too much. Like, I made a plan at the very start in that first year of 5 people's work. Like, I already had like a whole production company's job in my head. So like, I wanted to put out an episode on 9/11, let's say, and then have every point. So there's like 20 points in that show that we talk about. I wanted to have either a website article, a social media post posting the source article that I got that information from, or a video going deeper into more of the visual aspects of something. Like, we were talking on the 9/11 one, for example, with the way the towers fall, there's little puffs of smoke coming out the side. And on an audio podcast, you can see that, but it'd be way better if you could, look at it happening while I'm describing it, and go at the end of that little video on YouTube, and if you want to hear us go into this in depth, head over to our podcast and listen to the whole thing. So it's the YouTube people are being directed to the podcast people are being directed to YouTube.
Right.
People who are looking up stuff on Google would find it in the website, and then they'd be directed to either YouTube or the podcast. So it was all this integration that I had built in from the very, very start, that I thought, like, this is going to be a huge multimedia endeavor, and all podcasts should try to at least have some element of that. Because if you're just putting out podcast with no supporting media, the only way people are going to find you is going to be in their podcast app by typing in either your podcast name or the topic of your show. So for the very start, I think a lot of our audience came in for the Madeleine McCann case. I don't know if you know about that, do you?
That one I don't know.
It's a little girl who went missing in Portugal in 2007, and there was a whole big thing about it, and people think that her parents like killed her and hid the body, and there's this massive international search that still goes on today, and it's funded by like a government fund. They're still giving millions of pounds a year to the family to find this girl who disappeared more than 10 years ago. Like, it's the Johnny Gosh or it's the John Benet Ramsey, of
Portugal,
of England, like, because it was an English girl went missing in Portugal. So that got us massive amounts of traffic, like huge amounts of traffic on the website. So the website post was showing up at the top of all Google searches when you typed in Madeleine McCann hoax or Madeleine McCann conspiracy, which is a very popular term because it was still a popular case.
Right. It was a hot topic.
And then that would drive people from that website into the show. And then when they get the show, they're like, hey, these guys are hilarious. What else have they got? So, like, if you were only available in iTunes or in a podcast search bar, you have to then look at the title of your show. And the titles of the show sometimes are episode 116. There's nothing in the title to let you know what's in the show. It might maybe in the description, but the descriptions would show up further down the search if you type it into iTunes. So it's like these kind of things that you have to know and learn at the very, very start to get an audience straight away. So a lot of people would start to show, if they don't get a massive feedback because, their egos said, I should be getting 100,000 downloads a month. If I'm not getting that, I'm not doing this, which happens quite a bit. And you get what's it called? Podcast creep or whatever, where you put out 5 shows in once a week, and then like it's 3 weeks, and then it's like 5 months, and then you just don't put it out
and then
anymore.
They just ghost you.
Yeah, it's gone, like, because they're not getting the numbers they think they deserve. So for our show at the start, there was an awful lot of audience acquisition and then retention by putting in different elements of media so people could, because I knew the conspiracy lads that are into it, they're watching this stuff on YouTube, these huge, long 4, 5, 6 hour documentaries, and they want to be able to disseminate that information with someone. So we do it for them. We do the chewing, and then they can just swallow it as part of our podcast. Now it's a different story because there's people, calling me up looking for interviews. I'm on other people's shows. There's a bit of juice going on.
Right.
So people know I have an audience. They want an audience. So we're cross-pollinating. There's also I've been on national TV. I've been on national radio here in Ireland. I've been on loads of podcasts in America, the UK, and Ireland as a guest. So I'm getting into all of those things, and it's now more of a product that you either like or don't like. It's not about me, or it's not about breaking through that. What would you call it? Breaking through that kind of the veil of
the wall.
Conspiracy.
Right.
Yeah, the wall. Like there's a whole veil just generally draped over all conspiracy podcasts, and the one that pops out to you the most are like, I like the way those guys do it. So you can choose to take in Last Podcast on the Left, or if you want to hear 3 lads make the yucks. So we have a direct competition with them because it's a very similar format. Greg Carlwood in the Higher Side Chats, he does one-to-one interviews with the lads who write the books that we read and talk about on our show. He's talking to the actual people, and then you have stuff like Joe Rogan, where he gets people in, he gets celebrities, he gets comedians in, and they talk about the topics in a kind of a learned format. So it's like, a different shade of conspiracy for everybody. And now that's where we're working on getting the audiences is diversifying. I'm still trying to make like TCG TV, trying to make stuff for the YouTube channel. I branched out into doing true crime because they fall under my remit of conspiracy theory, like analysis or whatever.
Yeah, sure.
But they weren't strictly conspiracy theories. But I never wanted to be strictly conspiracy theories from the start. So I think, to recap, consistently improving quality. Our season 1, the mics were season 2 a little bit better, season 3 way better, and now we're up to like pro level mics, but that comes with money. So like consistent quality improvement, consistent innovation in the type of media product that you produce.
Yeah, evolution of what you're doing.
Absolutely essential. Like if you keep doing the same show all the time, maybe Dan Carlin or Mark Maron is an exception to the rule, but or Johnny Carson or David Letterman, they're exceptions to the rule. But if you're a podcaster and you're trying to maintain an audience or trying to maintain interest, you have to evolve your stuff. And then for podcasting particularly, a regular schedule. So if you're Thursday night or Monday morning or whatever, like that's the thing. When people know when they're getting it, if they expect it and they don't get it, you will lose audience. And that's for a starting out podcast, that's 100% essential to success. If you're not regular with it, people, I think, because they're not going to trust. Like, they look at my show now and I have over 100 episodes out, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he'll release it when he releases. He's not stopping now; it's his full-time job." But if you've only 5 episodes out, they're not going to invest their time. If those shits are weeks apart, they're going to be like, "I don't know."
Yeah.
It's like watching, you know, at the first season of some ropey TV show like Firefly or something. Like, no one's going to watch Firefly season 1 now because they know it got cancelled.
Yeah,
Even no matter how good it is, they're like, "I'm out." So yeah, consistency and improving quality is the main part about getting an audience, I think.
What are 3 key things you've done to grow your audience?
I've stayed true to myself and my own vision, no matter what people have said, like, "Oh, the shows are too long," or "Oh, you make too many dick jokes," or you know, change it to the way I like it. And out of the hundreds of thousands of people that could listen to it, there'd be one cunt that'll be like, "I don't like this." And somehow, because like I said, we have all the detriments of celebrity and very few of the benefits, they get a direct line to me through Twitter. And that message hits and it goes like,
Yep.
"Oh, that's sore." And somehow they're louder than all the praise messages. And you start doubting yourself and like, maybe I should make the show a bit different, or maybe I should change it to that. Like, don't be listening to people who don't make podcasts. Don't be listening to general off the street dickheads.
Yeah. They're usually the
loudest.
they
don't know what they're talking about. Stay true to your vision. Keep doing the thing that you're doing and try and improve it for yourself. And the people who like it will like it, and the people who don't won't. But maybe they will later on if you get better. That's the attitude to have. The other thing that I've done is try to get as many of the popular but pertinent episodes. This is probably very particular to my show, like to get all the proper and pertinent base information out so that I can grow. Like, I plan ahead. That's basically it's the easy answer. To plan ahead is my second one.
Yeah.
I've planned all these episodes ahead. So my earlier episodes are like groundwork and background knowledge to the more complicated later episodes. So when you talk about, we have a whole series on money. So there's like 5 money episodes. So the first one is like, what is money? And the second one is like, here's how the dollar works. And the third one is like, what's a petrodollar? And the fourth one is like the history of the Federal Reserve. So it's like growing the knowledge with the audience. And then the third thing is, if you want to grow your audience and have a successful podcast, for some people it's impossible, but like to make content that's evergreen. So obviously if you're doing a sports podcast, if you're doing like a UFC podcast, or you're doing a news podcast like What's in Politics Today or whatever, like it's real hard to make stuff that stands the test of time. And if, like, say like a baseball podcast, that's only good for 1 week to the next.
Right.
And next week that content is you know, inconsequential. So that means you have to be regular and you have to be improving your quality, but you can't make evergreen stuff. If you're doing a history podcast, or if you're doing you know, a politics podcast, like a retrospective, something that can be evergreen, leave out like the common references, leave out the you know, the jokes about the most recent episode of Game of Thrones, like leave out these things that would break the audience's concentration or make someone feel like they're not in on it. Like if you're listening to something from 3 years ago and I made a joke about, I don't know, something Obama did, and then they're not going to go, it was like, that's the third joke that I didn't really get. It's like watching old episodes of The Late Show with Jay Leno. And then on Friday night, he's like, so this week, did you hear about this? Did you hear about this? There's a guy went into a 7-Eleven. And it's like, none of that shit matters anymore. That's why people don't watch reruns of Jay Leno. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Right. That's a good point.
You have to have current stuff so that people can feel involved no matter when they listen to it. And having it gets easier the more shows you have. Because if you have 100 episodes and you get 1,000 new listeners, like 1,000 new listeners when you have 2 episodes, that's 2,000 downloads. If you have 100 episodes over the space of a couple of months, that's 100,000 downloads. So the more episodes you have out, the easier it is to grow the audience, because they're going to go back over your back catalogue if your stuff is evergreen.
Right.
They're able to go in listen to all your back catalogue, to get to know you, to come up to speed. And I get a load of messages. People refrain from messaging me until they get to the most recent one, and they're like, "Whew, just finished, got to the most recent episode. It took me 7 months, but now I'm in. What's the crack, Gordo?" Like, it's like I had to catch up.
Right.
And now I can say hello to you because I know everything. And they're like, "Hey, what's up, buddy?" You're like, "Brilliant. Now I know the crack." And then they get to have that anticipation of listening to every episode. Like, I remember when I watched Lost for the first time, the first 3 seasons I watched in the space of maybe 2 or 3 weeks because I had them all to download. And then the anticipation of waiting for that new episode, like on a Thursday or whatever, you were like, "Oh, when is it coming on?" And then it's on. You're like, "Oh my God, yes!" And you feel involved, and
you feel like you're invested in it, and
yes, you're part of it, rather than feeling out of the loop, feeling like you don't get the jokes, because nobody wants to feel unsmart. And ironically, I don't even know if unsmart is a real word, but nobody wants to feel dumb. They don't want to feel left out, or
you could say unsmart is an Irish term. You could just go with that.
Yeah, they get away with anything like that. So yeah, like nobody wants to feel outside of the cool gang. So I do try as much as possible to do that in my shows, where we're making jokes about nostalgia stuff that's way back in the past, or we're not doing something that's like, today in the news, blah blah blah, this happened. Like a lot of our episodes are about history, so it's easy to make like historical jokes, and it ends up being evergreen content because you're talking about stuff back then.
What are 3 key social media practices that you've utilized? You mentioned some of your social media before. And part of the question, I got 2 parts to this question that I want you to think about too. What platforms do you use with social media? And do you use an actual strategy with a plan, or is it like, we just make sure we keep putting stuff out consistently?
What do you mean by a strategy with a plan? Like, what would be?
I'll give you an example. If you had a social media calendar and you said, okay, on Mondays we put a GIF out, on Tuesday we put a poll, on Wednesday we make sure that we have quotes, or we ask a question.
I get you. I don't have something as regimented as that. Like, we'd have certain things for certain days. I would imagine if you had like throwback Thursdays, or feel good Fridays, or some other kind of alliterative thing to include your audience, that would probably work. But I don't think for our show, you're kind of scrabbling to keep up with stuff. And now with politics and conspiracy the way it is, every day is a brand new thing. Like, you can pick or choose what topic to jump on, and you just post away. The strategy that I had, and out from the start, was, like I said before, we'd release an episode. Let's say it's an episode on Sasquatch. And in our Sasquatch episode, we talked about the Florida skunk ape. We talked about the aquatic ape theory. And then we talked about the picture that was very famously taken with the blurry Sasquatch, where he's like looking sideways, like, "Whoa?"
Oh, yeah, right.
So those 3 things in the week we released the Sasquatch episode went out on social media, and there was a discussion about each of those things. So, like, I'm trying to take content that may have been a discussion point that wasn't, that somebody else may have had input on, and I put that out on social media during the week. I also will put stuff up on the website, like more like a deeper dive into something that may not work audibly. It might have to work visually. I do work a lot with Patreon folks, and I would push like outtakes, and my Patreon strategy is a little bit more kind of specific. So I take outtakes and I take the bits and bobs that wouldn't go into the main show. I put them on Patreon. But social media is like a mix between my achievements as a podcaster and the achievements of the show. So anything cool that happens to the show, I always make sure the crowd knows about it. And it's an awful lot of congratulatory stuff. I'd often push, I'd like repost, "Hey, this week's show is this." So a lot of reposts and reminders that there's a new episode up. I would put like stuff for discussions from the shows. I would put little funny bits that you would find that would be maybe something to, like, I have hashtag alerts on Feedly. So I go into Feedly, which is like an RSS feed catcher. And I have all the different tags, like hundreds of tags for all the stuff we talked about in all the shows. And then in Feedly every morning I go in and I try and find, oh, that's a cool thing. Like whatever news has come up around that hashtag.
Yeah.
I would then take a few of those articles out and go, say, for example, we were talking about Nibiru and Planet X and the progenitor alien race that made us. There was a thing came out recently about Oumuamua, which is a rock that flew past Earth. And
it looks like a needle.
The first thing that came from outside of our solar system ever, and they think it's like an alien space probe or whatever. So like we'd be sharing stuff about that, and it's always linking back then to like, hey, this week a thing flew into our solar system. Mental. Did you ever think there was aliens? Well, in our Nibiru episode, we talk about this and more. Check it, like that kind of thing. So it's always.
So you're always going back to an episode people can go to with a link.
Yeah. So it's the episodes are cornerstone content, and then the little bits, the visual aspects, and all there. That's all extra stuff. There's also conversation. I also do live chats. So once a month with the Patreon folks and with everyone in general, but the Patreon folks can join me on it, where I put up the webcam and we chat for 3, 4, maybe 5 hours about that month's 2 big episodes. So this month we released Cultural Marxism, and I'm just about to release an episode on the KKK. So I'll do a live chat next week, and people come on and they get to talk about what they thought about it. You know, the social justice warriors and the alt-right, and like they get to take the points that I made in both of those shows and go like, on this such and such an episode, you said this thing. No, I think this, and we get to actually, because a lot of people are listening to our show while they're walking to and from work or they're commuting, and I hear from people I meet in real life where they say, when you said this on the show, I wanted to shout down the phone at you that it was this or it was, I often get replies from people like when they say, when I say on the show I get a name wrong, and just to be involved or just to feel like they've contributed, they'll send me the correct name.
Right.
So they've never communicated with me before. And I'm like, oh, the guy, what's his name? The dog whisperer, Caesar Chavez. And they're like, no, it's Caesar Milan. And I get like 5 dozen messages correcting me.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of things people want to be involved in. So I try and involve them in that. I use Buffer, which is an app that you're able to write one post, and it posts to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Google Plus, which is about to die. Lord of mercy on Google Plus. I also have a subreddit, and that's usually the place where I have to field criticism because the people on Reddit tend to be mildly toxic.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of nice people there too. But obviously, you get your creepos. I also have like a Pinterest page. It's not very active, but I have all the sources and all go in there. And then I communicate with people through DMs on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook are probably the 3 main ones. I usually put the same content up everywhere. I try to make like for my documentary project that when I go to the US to make a bunch of documentaries, I have a private TCG TV Instagram feed, and that's only available to the people who donate to the GoFundMe and Patreon. So that's a private feed that I'm going to have stuff that I don't want out to the general public, but they can be part of it. And that's driving people to donate so they can get access to that material. Same with Patreon. Like you have secret stuff that only Patreon people get. They pay some dollars.
Right.
And they
it's an
get
incentive for
them
to give you some money.
Yeah.
But in general,
so
like with Twitter, Facebook, and that, you really use one piece of content you throw out. But then for the premium places like Patreon, you're doing special things. Am I getting that
exactly,
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then when I stream on all platforms. So I stream on Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and YouTube. But because YouTube and Patreon have an integration, I stream the episodes live using YouTube. I'd love to do it using Twitch, but there's no way to make like a private stream on Twitch where you can do that on YouTube. So these little snags. So I'm able to stream privately just to Patreon folks. And then I get to edit it up and release it then as a thing when I release the episode. But like there's a certain element of exclusivity and inclusivity. They're the 2 terms that I would use when it comes to social media. So you want everyone to be included. You want that feeling of inclusivity. If you're an audience member, you're in on the joke. You're in on the crack. Right. You're in on the information. You're not left behind. If you do your homework, you can get the full appreciation of the content of the show. And then the exclusive part is if you want to know more or if you want to get near me, like to have a conversation, to be involved, there's a paywall, and you know, that's my wages, that's my salary, is that exclusive barrier of donation. So like if people are putting up stuff on social media, it doesn't have to be regular. You know, if you're BuzzFeed, or if you're fucking, I don't know, one of these lads, like what's Zooey Deschanel's one, Hello Bonnie or something like that. There's one she has.
Right.
You go on in the morning and Instagram is just like, there's like 15 posts just all lashed out all at one go, and you're like, ugh, too many. That kind of stuff can get overwhelming, so I don't like to put too much up there. Plus, I want to reply to everybody, and I do try to reply to everyone. I read every message and every email and every DM that's sent to me. I read them all, but sometimes you just can't reply to everyone.
Right.
And one thing that I fail on is, like we said earlier on, the negative ones often are louder than the positive ones somehow. Right. So I try to refrain from rewarding that negative energy with a reply. But if sometimes they're making accusations or saying some shit, and you're like, no, fuck you, buddy.
Yeah,
like,
sometimes you have to respond to it. Right?
Yeah, it's the natural inclination to be like, fuck you. So I'm trying really hard to not reply to negative people and more reward the positive people for their positive input. That's a thing that I think is really important, that if someone's willing to, you know, go out of their way to positively support your show, even if it's just a comment to say, hey, loved your show, this is great, that you just be like, thanks man, like there's more here, or thanks for the support, or whatever. To reply more to positive people than to negative people is good for your head, and it's good for your fan base as well.
What is the secret to your podcast success?
I think personally, I feel that it's just sticking to your principles, no matter, going with your gut, like no matter what people are saying you should do, or like the technical stuff, like people are like, oh man, you should get a better microphone, or you should put up like some sound treatment on your walls or whatever. I'm like, yeah, I know I should, everyone should. Like, you know, if we could all be in a radio station making these podcasts, we would. But if people are like, oh man, you shouldn't talk about such and such a thing so much, or, you know, you shouldn't make fun of this, or you shouldn't do this. I think sticking to your principles, knowing who you are, and being yourself on your show unashamedly, will make it a lot easier to grow, because you're going to grow naturally as a person, and your audience is going to grow with you and see that growth. You're going to be able to be more natural and be more relaxed while you're doing the show, because you don't have to put on a facade, or you don't have to maintain a fake narrative in your head to be a certain person. Like, oh no, this is podcast Gordo now, I'm not allowed to talk about this, or I'm not allowed to say this word. You're like, fuck it, say what you like. And then to be able to create as much as possible without getting burned out, because you burn out if you're trying to maintain that facade. You burn out a lot quicker. I think that's why my shows are 6 and 7 hours long, because I'm like, yeah, wait now, let's go back and talk about this thing. Like, you know, that's my natural inclination as a person. If I was in my head worrying about like the audience getting bored, or people are going like, oh, these episodes are too long, you know, you could miss out on something important. You could miss out on a certain part of the conversation that could be the best part of the show.
Right.
So I think the secret to the success and the natural growth of the show, and me as a person, and as a podcaster, and as a man, you know, and as a media producer, and as a technical operator of, you know, all of these different things that are advancing all the time. You know, if you're a person who uses Audacity and you get the opportunity to use a better software, but you're like, no, I won't use it because I'm used to Audacity. You're like, okay, just dig your own grave then, because that's it. It's over for you.
Right.
You know, people using FeedBurner years ago, and they're like, I swear by it. I absolutely swear by it. And then like 4 years ago, Google just went, yeah, FeedBurner, we're never going to update that. And you have your whole business built on a FeedBurner feed. Like, God,
yeah,
good night. You're stuck. So being yourself and willing to grow, willing to change, and having a set of principles that you will stick to either personally or professionally, and and not listening to like the minuscule negative comments that people are like, you should change this. Like, just find your thing and hammer on it and be yourself. Like, that's, your audience will come and find you. And I found that when I was doing stand-up comedy, that I was trying to push myself on 30 people who hadn't initially signed up to see me. And then I turned up and they were like, this is not what I signed up for. But if you have a podcast, people will find you. And then they're like, I want more.
Yeah, and if they come back, they did sign up
switch it off.
That.
Exactly. If they don't like it, they can just switch it off to another one. They're not stuck there for 15 minutes where you tell jokes, you know, in a dark comedy club. So yeah, the secret to it, I think, is unabashedly being myself.
What's the next big thing in podcasting?
As we talked about before we started the official recordings here, I think the next big thing is the unification of podcast stats, the unilateral measurement of all shows. And, with our powers combined, we are Captain Planet. Like, all the kids come together, put their rings together, and we're able to then go to the advertisers as legacy media, as movie studios, as TV networks are able to do, with a unified audience measurement statistic.
Yeah.
And be able to go, this is how many people according to this thing. And if you're paying him that much, you pay these guys this much. So it means that it doesn't just exclude, or it doesn't just include the massive shows that get paid. That you can have something like a YouTube infrastructure where even if you're getting 2,000 downloads for your episode, you're still getting, $10, $12, $15, $20.
Right.
It's still some sort of an incentive. Whereas, like, oh no, you can't earn any money unless you're making $2,000 per episode. It's like, well, all the way up to that. That's like going into a job and they're like, hey, can I have a job here? It's like, yeah, but you can only work 70 hours a week. If you work any less than 70, you don't make any money.
Right.
You're like, what?
1 minute under and you don't get anything.
Yeah. What happens if I work like 40 hours a week? Oh no, you don't get anything. But I worked really hard. Yeah. But you have to work 70 or else. But when you work 70, you get like $200,000 a year. Like, it doesn't make any sense why that's not being done. And I think a unilateral podcast measurement service, maybe through iTunes, if our partner with one of the big measurement services like PodTrack or like Libsyn or Blueberry, if we're all able to unite the clans, like Braveheart, William Wallace, everyone comes together and we just sign on the paper, the Fellowship of the Ring, like we're all together in this thing, like, and my axe, that could make it monetizable, like the way they have it on YouTube, where even small creators are getting paid. And that helps them get better equipment. It helps them be able to, pull back a bit from the full-time job and maybe put the hobby as more of a jobby and get, take that part-time position and work on the podcast and maybe at some point in 2 to 3 years, like flip it over into a full-time gig. I was blessed that happened to me. I was delighted that I'm able to turn this into a full-time job, but it is a full-time job. Like I'm doing 12, 13, 14, 15 hour days.
Yeah.
Like your arse is stuck to the chair.
Right. Which is why
like
we wear pajama pants. Exactly.
You got to have comfort, man. But I think the next big thing is unified measurement statistics and a measurement service so that we can finally get paid what we're worth. And I say we as in all podcasters all together,
With each episode, I try to come away with 3 takeaways. That was impossible with Gordon's interview. I've listened to this multiple times already, and each time I stop taking notes because there's so much information coming at me. I just want to absorb it. What are your takeaways? What did Gordon say that affected your business and content creation going forward? Share your thoughts on the Facebook thread for this episode. I would love to read your insights. You can find Gordon's website at thoseconspiracyguys.com. Make sure to follow Those Conspiracy Guys on Facebook and definitely join their Facebook group as well. It's totally great. Find his shows on your favorite podcast app, be it Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn, wherever. Be sure to subscribe and give those conspiracy guys great reviews wherever you can. And while you're at it, please subscribe to New Media Lab with Robert Southgate wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can email the show at southgatesmallbusiness@gmail.com. New Media Lab is on Facebook. Simply search for @New Media Lab Show. Our network's website is Southgate Media Group, where you can find this, as well as the over 100 other podcasts and blogs and videos and live events that we have coming up. We also have a book coming out. New information about that will be hitting soon. If you want to follow me personally, I'm on Twitter @RSouthgate or on Instagram @RobSouthgate. Support this show and get awesome extra content by becoming a patron. Go to patreon.com/New Media Lab and choose your tier. Please rate and review this show on whatever service you subscribe to podcasts on. It really helps others find the show and tells me if you like what I'm doing here. You can find New Media Lab on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, hopefully anywhere else that distributes podcasts. If you can't find this show, let me know and I'll rectify that situation. All this plus more links will be in the show notes and on our website, so don't worry if you don't have a pen to write all this down. Thanks again to Gordon for helping with my thesis and for being such an incredible guest. That's it for this week, everyone. The next episode of Creators Lab will drop next Tuesday, and we'll be back with our next guest on New Media Lab next Thursday. Ooh, and it's another good one. Until then, get out there and create something.